Story by U/Inandes, Milos Bejetic, Part 1. The first time, Chapter 1. Who I am. I want to be clear about who I am before I tell you any of this, because the kind of story I am about to tell you is the kind that requires you to understand something about the person telling it. The person telling it matters in a way that it does not always matter in other kinds of stories. I am a practical man. I have always been a practical man, even as a child, even before life had given me the particular reasons for practicality that it gave me later. I was the kind of child who wanted to understand how things worked rather than accepting that they did. I was the kind of teenager who found the rational explanation for strange events more satisfying than the mysterious one, not because mystery made me uncomfortable, but because the rational explanation was usually more interesting once you understood it fully, and the mysterious one was often just a rational explanation with the explanation removed. I became an engineer. This is not a coincidence. I spent my career designing systems that had to be correct, systems where a mistake was not an interesting variation, but a failure with measurable consequences. I was good at my work. I was good at it because I thought in the way that good engineering requires, which is sequentially and without sentiment, following the problem where it leads rather than where you want it to go. I am telling you all of this so that when I tell you what I am about to tell you, you understand that it is not the account of a person who jumps to unusual conclusions. It is not the account of a person who is prone to superstition, or who fills the gaps in his knowledge with supernatural explanations. It is not the account of a person who wants this to be true. I am a practical, rational man, and what I am about to describe has no rational explanation that I have been able to construct in 23 years of trying. I have tried with the full application of an engineering mind, and I have arrived, every time at the same place, at the edge of what that mind can account for, looking out at something it cannot. Her name was Rose. I do not know what she was. Chapter 2. My mother's friend. My mother had a circle of women friends the way women of her generation and her place in the world often did. A loose and overlapping network of neighbors and co-workers and relatives, wives and church acquaintances who moved through each other's lives with the easy familiarity of people who have decided that community is a thing worth maintaining through the specific work of maintaining it. They came to our house for coffee. My mother went to theirs. They called each other and visited each other and knew the details of each other's children and husbands and household situations with a thoroughness that I found remarkable even as a child, when I had not yet fully understood how much effort that thoroughness required. Rose appeared in this circle when I was 10 years old. I do not know how she came to be part of it. I have asked my mother in the years since, and her answers have been inconsistent in a way that I initially attributed to the ordinary inconsistency of memory over time, and that I now attribute to something else. She says Rose was a new neighbor. She says Rose was the wife of someone her husband knew from work. She says Rose was introduced by another friend whose name she cannot recall. Each time I ask, the account is different in its details, and the one thing that is consistent across all the versions is this: my mother cannot describe the first time she met Rose. She remembers Rose being present. She does not remember Rose arriving. The first time I saw Rose, I was 10 and my mother had a group of her friends over on a Saturday afternoon. I came home from the yard and went through the kitchen to the refrigerator, and I did not notice Rose in particular, because the kitchen and the adjacent sitting room were full of women my mother's age, and I was 10 and principally interested in what was in the refrigerator. The second time I saw her was different. Chapter 3. The kitchen. Alone the second time was a Tuesday, 2 weeks after the Saturday gathering, and my mother was at the market. I was alone in the house. I was doing homework at the kitchen table with the particular divided attention of a 10-year-old whose homework involves mathematics he finds straightforward and who consequently has significant mental capacity available for other things, including the awareness of his surroundings. Rose let herself in through the back door. I heard the door open and looked up, and she was there, in the doorway to the kitchen. And the first thing I noticed was that she was holding something in both hands. An orange. A single orange, resting in both her palms the way you might hold something you were bringing as a gift, offered forward rather than held at her side. She looked at me. She had been, on the Saturday afternoon 2 weeks before, an unremarkable woman. Medium height, medium build, somewhere in the age range of my mother's other friends, which was to say somewhere in the middle of adulthood. Brown hair. A face that was, in the broad category of faces, ordinary. Not beautiful, not ugly, not distinctive in any particular direction. The face of a person in a crowd that you would not remember afterward. But the woman in my kitchen doorway on that Tuesday afternoon was not the same as the woman I had barely noticed at the Saturday gathering, and the difference was not in her appearance, which was the same, but in something that I cannot describe precisely without risking imprecision. It was the quality of her stillness. The way she stood in the doorway without moving at all, not the ordinary stillness of a person who has paused in a doorway, but the absolute and total stillness of something that has arranged itself to look like a person who has paused. And her face, which was the same ordinary face it had been on Saturday, held a different expression. Not a smile exactly, not any expression I had a ready word for. Something that involved the corners of the mouth being slightly elevated and the eyes being fixed on me with a quality of attention that was not the ordinary attention of an adult noticing a child in a kitchen. "Take it," she said. Her voice was not her voice. This is the thing I have never been able to explain and have never stopped trying to explain. On Saturday, her voice had been ordinary. The voice of a woman in the middle of adulthood talking to other women of similar age. A voice with the ordinary inflections and the ordinary register of a person speaking in a social setting. The voice in my kitchen on Tuesday was something else. It was high. Not the high of a person who has pitched their voice up for comic effect, but genuinely high. The high of a voice that belongs to something much smaller than the woman standing in the doorway. A child's voice. Not any child I had ever heard, but the idea of a child's voice, the fundamental characteristic of childness in a voice, extracted from any specific child and placed into an adult face with an effect that was wrong in a way I felt before I processed it. "Take it," she said again in that voice, holding the orange forward in both hands. I did not take it. I do not know exactly why I did not take it. I was 10 years old and I was alone in my house, and a woman my mother knew was offering me a piece of fruit, and the ordinary social calculus of a 10-year-old in that situation would produce the response of taking the fruit and saying thank you and eating it or setting it aside. But I did not. I sat at the table with my mathematics homework in front of me, and I looked at the orange in her hands, and at the face above the orange, and something in me that had no language for what it was recognizing simply recognized that the orange was not something I should take. "No, thank you," I said. Her face changed, not dramatically. A small change in the configuration of the expression, something around the eyes, and then she was the ordinary woman she had been on Saturday again. The voice restored to its ordinary register, and she was saying something about my mother not being home, asking when she would return, and I told her, and she said she would come back, and she left through the back door the way she had come. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after she left. Then I finished my homework. I did not tell my mother. Chapter 4. Why I did not tell. The reason I did not tell my mother was not fear, although there had been something in that kitchen that I am willing to call fear in retrospect, even if I did not call it that at the time. The reason was the certainty, deep and immediate, and not requiring analysis, that if I told my mother what had happened, she would have an explanation for it. Not a correct explanation, just an explanation. My mother's friend had come by when she was not home and had offered her son a piece of fruit and spoken to him in a way he had found a bit odd. This was not an event that the adult world, with its confident access to ordinary explanations for ordinary things, would treat as requiring investigation. And I was 10, and the ordinary social pressure on a 10-year-old to conform to the adult world's framework for understanding events is very significant. You learn, at 10, that the adult framework is the framework that is taken seriously, and that departing from it has social costs that are difficult to pay at that age. So I did not tell. I watched Rose. In the months that followed, when she came for coffee with my mother's circle, I watched her with the careful and deliberate attention of someone who has decided that the most important thing is to understand what they are looking at. I watched her the way I would later, as an engineer, watch a system that had produced an unexpected output, looking for the variable that explained it. Around my mother, she was the ordinary woman she appeared to be, friendly, engaged. She laughed at the right moments and asked the right questions and remembered details from previous conversations in the way of someone who genuinely listened when other people spoke. She drank coffee and ate the cake my mother put out and said polite and unremarkable things about the weather and local events and the various topics that circulated through my mother's circle. She never looked at me when my mother was in the room. Not once, in all the Saturday afternoons she came to our house over the following 2 years, did she look at me when my mother was present. She spoke to the other women. She drank her coffee. She was, in every observable way, entirely indifferent to my existence, but I could feel her. I mean this in the most literal and precise way available to me. I was aware of her the way you are aware of a heat source in a room, not through any specific sensory channel, but through the accumulated information of several of them, a directional awareness that had no single point of origin. When she was in the house, I knew where she was without looking. When she moved from one room to another, I felt the shift before I saw it. When she left, I felt the quality of the house change in the specific way it changed after a sound that has been present for so long that you have stopped consciously registering it finally stops. I never told anyone. I watched and waited and eventually stopped waiting because the third time she came to me alone did not happen for 2 years. And 2 years at 10 is long enough to begin to accommodate almost anything into the ongoing ordinary of your life. Part 2. The years she followed Chapter 5. The second time I was 12, the second time she came to me alone, and I was not in my home when it happened. I was at a fair that came through our town every summer, a modest traveling fair with rides and a midway and the particular smell of fried food and machinery that belongs specifically to summer fairs and nowhere else. I was with 2 friends from school, and we had covered the midway twice and ridden the acceptable rides, and were in the process of deciding between 2 remaining options for the afternoon. She was at the entrance to the Hall of Mirrors. She was standing at the entrance in the way she stood in doorways, with the absolute stillness that was not the ordinary stillness of a person pausing, but the arranged stillness of something presenting itself as a person pausing. She was holding an orange. My friends were beside me. She was perhaps 20 feet away. And in the 20 feet between us, the fair continued in its ordinary way. The noise and the light and the moving crowd and the smell of fried food, and none of it touched the particular quality of the space between me and the woman with the orange. She was looking at me. My friends were talking about something. I did not hear what they were saying. I was looking at Rose, and Rose was looking at me across 20 feet of summer fair, and the expression on her face was the expression from the kitchen. The configuration that was not quite a smile and not quite anything else. The fixed and deliberate expression of something that has chosen an expression and is wearing it the way you wear a piece of clothing you have selected for a specific purpose. Then one of my friends bumped my shoulder and asked if I wanted to go in the Hall of Mirrors, and I looked at him for a moment and then looked back at the entrance. She was gone, not walked away, not moved into the crowd, gone with the absence that is not the absence of someone who has left, but the absence of something that was not reliably there in the first place. I stood at the fair entrance for a moment. Then I said I did not want to go in the Hall of Mirrors. I said I wanted another ride on the one that went fast. My friends agreed. We spent the rest of the afternoon on the rides, and I did not see Rose again that day. But on the walk home, I found an orange in the pocket of my jacket, the pocket I had put nothing in, the jacket that had been on my body all afternoon. I threw it in the first trash can I passed. I did not tell anyone. Chapter 6. The pattern of it: she came to me 4 more times between the age of 12 and the age of 17, always alone, always with the orange, always in the voice that was not her voice, always with the expression that was not quite a smile. The circumstances were always different. Once I was walking home from school. Once I was at the library. Once I was at a friend's house when my friend had gone upstairs for something. Once I was 17 and alone in my car in a parking lot, and she was simply there, suddenly, in the passenger seat with the orange in her hands and the voice asking me to take it. And the presence of her in that enclosed space was the worst it had been in all the times before. The wrongness of her more concentrated in the small interior of the car. And I got out and stood in the parking lot, and she was gone when I looked through the window. The orange was on the passenger seat. I left the orange there. I did not touch it. I drove home, and the next morning I put on a pair of gloves and removed the orange from the car and threw it away in the bin at the end of the driveway, and I went to school, and I did not tell anyone. The pattern of it was this: she appeared when I was alone. She did not appear when anyone else was present. She offered the orange. I refused. She disappeared. I found the orange afterward in whatever location I had occupied when she appeared, left there despite the fact that she was no longer present to have left it. I thought about this pattern with the methodical part of my mind that would later make me a good engineer. I tried to identify the variable. I tried to understand whether the pattern had a logic, whether the appearances were random or scheduled, whether there was a correlation between some condition of my life and the appearances that I had not yet identified. I looked for the explanation. I did not find it. What I found in the absence of the explanation was an accommodation. I had been living alongside this for 7 years by the time I was 17, and 7 years is long enough for almost anything to become normalized, not accepted, not explained, but filed into the ongoing ordinary of a life in the way that a chronic pain is filed. You carry it. You do not stop being aware of it, but you do not allow it to stop you from going to the library or the fair or school. What I also found in the absence of the explanation was a single thing I was certain of. I was not going to take the orange. Chapter 7. What I told my girlfriend I left home for university at 18, and for the first 3 years of university, I did not see Rose. I will not say she was absent because I never stopped being aware that she was a feature of my life rather than a past event. But the appearances did not come during those 3 years, and the accommodation I had made was sufficient to allow those years to be ordinary university years, which they were, without qualification. I was 21 when I met Adiz. She was a postgraduate student in the biological sciences, 3 years older than me. serious and specific in the way of someone who has known since adolescence what they want to do and has been doing it without deviation. She had a quality of fundamental steadiness that I found, and still find, more attractive than almost any other quality a person can have. The steadiness of someone who is fully committed to their own version of themselves and has no need to perform it for others. We were together for 6 months before I told her about Rose. I told her on a Sunday evening in her flat, and I told her with the care and sequential precision that the account required, beginning at the kitchen at 10 and going through each appearance in order. I told her about the voice and the orange and the expression and the disappearances and the oranges left behind. I told her that I had not told anyone else, and that the reason I was telling her was that I trusted her with things I did not trust the world with, which was true and remains true. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "Are you afraid of her?" I thought about this seriously, the way I tried to think about all of Adi's questions, which were always more specific than they appeared and deserved specific answers. I said, "I have been afraid of her in some of the encounters, but the fear is not the primary thing. The primary thing is that I do not understand her, and I do not like not understanding things." Adiz looked at me. She said, "What do you think the orange is?" I had thought about this for 11 years at that point and had not arrived at a satisfying answer. I said, "I think it is something she wants me to accept. I think accepting it means accepting something about her or about what she is. I think refusing it is the correct choice, and I do not know why I believe that, but I believe it completely." Adiz said, "What would happen if you took it?" I said, "I do not know. I have no basis for an answer to that question." She said, "But you are not going to find out." "No," I said. She accepted this. Not in the way of someone filing away information they do not take seriously, but in the way of someone who has heard something true and has decided to treat it as true. This was one of the specific things I loved about Adiz from the beginning, the way she treated things that other people would dismiss with the same seriousness she brought to things the world agreed were real. Not credulity, precision. The thing was true or it was not, and if it was true, it deserved to be treated as true regardless of whether its truth was convenient or comfortable. She said, "If she comes back, you are going to tell me." "Yes," I said. She nodded, and that was the end of the conversation, and we had dinner and talked about other things. And I felt, for the first time in 11 years, that the weight of the thing was distributed rather than entirely on me, which was the particular relief of being believed by someone whose judgment you trust. Chapter 8. At the restaurant, Rose came back 6 months after I told Adiz. It was at a restaurant. Adiz and I had been there for a colleague's birthday, a group of 9 of us at a long table, and the evening had been good, the kind of dinner that extends past the food into the particular pleasure of people who enjoy each other's company, discovering that their enjoyment extends well past the time at which the bill has been paid. It was late when we left, the restaurant mostly empty, and Adiz stopped in the entrance lobby to respond to a message on her phone while I stepped out to the street to get the air. Rose was on the pavement. She was standing outside the restaurant in the way she stood, the total stillness, the orange in both hands. She was looking at me. I want to be precise about what I felt in this moment, because it was different from what I had felt in the previous appearances, and the difference is significant. I was 22. I had been carrying this for 12 years. I had told Adiz, and the telling had changed something about the weight of it, and that change had changed something about the fear. I was not unafraid, but the fear was not the overwhelming thing it had been when I was 12 at the fair or 17 in the car. I was a grown man on a lit street outside a restaurant with 9 people I knew a door away. and the fear was present, but it was something I could stand in rather than something that was standing on me. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said aloud on the empty pavement outside the restaurant, "No, I am not going to take it. I have never been going to take it. Whatever it means, whatever happens next, the answer is no." Her face changed. It changed in a way I had not seen in 12 years of appearances, a way I had not seen in the kitchen at 10 or the fair at 12 or the car at 17. It changed in the way of something that has been very patient and has encountered, for the first time, a refusal that is different from the previous refusals. The previous refusals had been the refusals of a child and then a teenager, the refusals of someone who was afraid and was refusing from fear. This refusal was different. I was not refusing because I was afraid. I was refusing because I had decided. Her face held the change for a moment. Then Adiz came out of the restaurant and put her hand in mine and asked if I was all right, and I said yes. There was no one on the pavement. There was no orange. I told Adiz what had happened. We walked home and I told her on the way, and she listened in her precise and unhurried way. And at the end, she said that she thought what I had said on the pavement was the right thing to say. Not because saying it would necessarily change anything, because it was true, and saying true things matters regardless of whether the thing you are saying it to can hear you. I did not see Rose for 8 years after that. Part 3. What we found out, Chapter 9. My mother's other friend I was 30 and working in the city Adiz and I had moved to after my graduation. And we had been living together for 7 years with the particular ease of two people who have discovered that their individual natures are compatible in a way that makes the shared life genuinely better than the separate ones. My mother called on a Thursday evening with the tone she used when she had something to tell me that she was not sure how to begin. She told me that a woman from her old circle, a woman named Vera who had been one of the regular Saturday coffee visitors when I was a child, had contacted her after many years. They had spoken on the phone for a long time. My mother was calling me because of something that had come up in the conversation with Vera. Vera had asked about Rose. She had asked in a specific way, my mother said, not in the way of someone inquiring after a mutual friend they had lost touch with. In the way of someone confirming that the Rose she had known was the Rose my mother had known, checking specific details against each other, the name, the appearance, the way she had joined the circle. My mother said, Vera's son had some experiences with Rose that she never told anyone about at the time. He has told her now. She wanted to know if anything similar happened with you. I sat with the phone against my ear for a long moment. Yes, I said. My mother was quiet. Then she said she offered him an orange. Yes, I said again. Another silence. My mother said he took it. Chapter 10. Vera's son, his name was Stefan, and he was 3 years older than me, and I had met him perhaps twice during the years our mother's circles overlapped. Brief and forgettable childhood encounters of the kind that leave no lasting impression. I called him. Adiz sat beside me while I made the call, which was what I had asked her to do, and she did not speak, but her presence was the thing that made the call possible in the way that her presence had made the telling 3 years into our relationship possible. Stefan answered, and I told him who I was and why I was calling. There was a long pause on his end. Then he said, "How many times did she come to you?" I said, 7 times over 12 years. I refused each time. Another pause. He said she came to me 4 times. I refused 3 times. I waited. He said the 4th time I was 14. I was alone in my house. She came in through the back the way she always did, and she was holding the orange and she was using that voice. And I took it. I said, "What happened?" He said, "I have been trying to explain what happened for 16 years, and I have not found a way that makes it sound like anything other than the account of someone who was not fully conscious of what was happening at the time, because that is what it felt like. Not like being asleep, not like being under any substance, like being present but at one remove, the way a dream has a version of you in it that makes decisions, but that is not making the decisions in the way you make decisions when you are awake. The you in the dream does things and you watch them. I said, "What did you do?" He said, "I ate the orange." He said it quietly, not with drama, with the particular flatness of a person stating a fact they have had a long time to come to terms with and have not fully come to terms with. I said, "What happened after?" He said, "She was gone. The orange was gone. I was standing in my kitchen alone and there was nothing there and I did not feel any different physically, and I went to my room and I did not tell anyone." I said, "But something was different." He said, "Yes, I waited." He said, "She stopped coming. After the fourth time, she never came again. I waited for her the way you wait for something that has been a feature of your life for 4 years and she did not come. She was just gone." I said, "Is that the bad part?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "The bad part is the dreams. Since the night of the fourth time, I have dreamed about her every night. Every single night for 16 years. She is always in the same place in the dream, standing in my kitchen with the orange, but in the dream she is not offering it. She is holding it and looking at me, and in the dream I understand, the way you understand things in dreams that you cannot understand in waking, what the expression on her face is." I said, "What is the expression?" He said, "Satisfaction." Chapter 11. What Vera knew. Vera was 71 and living alone in the town where she had always lived, and she received us, Adiz and me, in her sitting room on a Saturday afternoon with the particular composed quality of a woman who has decided that there is a conversation she is going to have and has been preparing for it. She had made tea. She had arranged herself in the chair beside the window with the afternoon light behind her, and she looked at us with the steady and patient look of someone who has held on to something for a long time and is ready to put it down. She told us about Rose. She told us that Rose had appeared in her life a year before Rose appeared in my mother's, that she had known her slightly longer than my mother had, and that in that additional year, she had learned something about Rose that she had never shared with anyone, including my mother, because she had not known how to share it without being thought confused. She had gone to Rose's house. Once, only once, in the second year of their acquaintance, she had gone to a house where Rose was living, a rented house on the edge of town, to bring something back that she had left at a gathering. She had knocked and Rose had not answered, and the door had not been fully latched, and it had swung inward at her knock. She had looked inside. She said that the interior of Rose's house was ordinary in most respects. Furniture, a kitchen visible from the front door, a hallway, the things that are in a house when a person lives in it. But the table in the front room, the table directly visible from the door, was covered with oranges. Not a bowl of fruit, not a few oranges in an ordinary domestic arrangement. The table was entirely covered, edge to edge, and the oranges were arranged in a specific pattern that Vera had looked at for a long time before backing away from the door and pulling it almost shut and going home. She described the pattern. It was a circle, with a smaller circle inside it and a smaller circle inside that. 3 concentric rings of oranges arranged on a table, and in the center of the innermost ring, 1 orange with a cut in it. A single clean cut, she said, the kind made with a knife, running around the circumference without removing the peel, so that the orange could be opened along that line. She said she did not know what the pattern was. She said she had not told anyone, because she could not think of what to say that would communicate what she had seen without sounding, as though she had misunderstood an ordinary domestic scene. She had not misunderstood it. She had understood it clearly, and the understanding had been the reason she had backed away from the door and not returned. She said, after I saw that I paid more attention, "I watched Rose at the gatherings. I watched her at my house and your mother's house and the other houses. She was always the same in the gatherings, ordinary, unremarkable, easy to be with. She never talked much about herself. No one knew where she had come from or what her life before was." She paused. She said, "When my son told me what happened, I went back through the years in my mind. I thought about how many boys there had been in the circle, sons and nephews and friends' children. I thought about how many of them might have been approached the way my son was approached. I thought about how many of them might have taken the orange." She looked at me. She said, "What did it want with the boys?" I said, "I do not know." She said, "I do not know either. But I know she was patient. She was very, very patient." Part 4. The Research, Chapter 12. What Adiz found. Adiz was a scientist, and the scientific approach to a problem was the approach she brought to this one, which was not an approach designed for this kind of problem, but which was better than nothing and considerably better than what I had, which was 20 years of observations without a framework for them. She spent 3 months reading. She read widely and without pre-commitment to any particular explanatory framework, which was a difficult thing to do given that most of what was available existed within frameworks that required either full belief or full dismissal, and she was committed to neither. She read folklore, and she read anthropology, and she read accounts from disparate cultures and disparate centuries, with the question in mind of whether any of them described something consistent with what I had described. She found 3 categories of account that she considered relevant. The first was the class of entity described in various European traditions as something that appeared in human form and offered specific things to specific people, and whose offer was a form of claim, such that accepting the offered thing established a relationship between the acceptor and the entity that the entity considered binding. The form of this class of account varied significantly across cultures and centuries, but the underlying structure was consistent. The entity offered, the person accepted or refused, and the consequences of acceptance were described in uniformly negative terms across every account Adiz found. The second category was accounts from Central and West African traditions of entities that attach themselves to specific individuals across generations of a family, sometimes benevolent and sometimes not, whose attachment was characterized by persistence and by the giving of specific objects that functioned as bonds. The third category was a smaller and more scattered set of accounts that did not fit neatly into any cultural tradition, but that described individual experiences strikingly similar to what I had described. A figure appearing repeatedly over years, always alone with the witness, always offering a specific item. The item described variously across accounts, but consistently described as something the witness knew, without explicit reason, that they should not accept. Adiz set these 3 categories of account in front of me on a Sunday afternoon, and she said, "I am not telling you that any of these accounts explains what Rose is. I am telling you that across cultures and across centuries, there are accounts that describe something that behaves as Rose behaves, and that the accounts consistently agree on one thing." I asked what the one thing was. She said, "The ones who refuse are not hurt. The accounts do not agree on what happens to the ones who accept. They describe very different outcomes. Some outcomes are worse than others, but none of them are described as good." I thought about Stefan and his 16 years of nightly dreams. I thought about the expression on Rose's face that Stefan had finally been able to name. satisfaction. Chapter 13. The question of what she is. I have thought about this question for 23 years, and I am going to share my current position on it with the caveat that it is a position rather than a conclusion, because I do not think a conclusion is available to me. I do not believe Rose is a person. I believed she was a person when I was 10, because the only category available to me at 10 for a woman in a kitchen doorway was person. I do not believe that now. I believe she is something that occupies the appearance of a person the way water occupies the shape of a container, not because the form is the thing, but because the form is what the context requires. I do not believe she is malevolent in the way that humans are malevolent, through intention toward a specific person, or through the specific desire to cause harm. I think malevolence of that kind requires a relationship with the person being harmed that involves knowing them in a way that Rose did not know me. She did not know me. She presented herself to me. She offered me the orange. She disappeared when I refused. I was not a person to her. I was a position, a category, a potential acceptor. What I believe about the orange is this, and it is not something I can support with evidence, and is the result of 23 years of thinking rather than any information I have received from outside myself. The orange is a consent. It is an offer of entry, not into anything specific that I can name, not into a place or a state, but into a relationship of a kind that does not have a name in the vocabularies available to me. A relationship with something that is not human, and that wanted the relationship to begin with the acceptance being chosen freely. I believe it wanted the choice to be free, because a coerced acceptance is not the same thing as a real one, and it needed a real one. I believe this is also why it was patient. A patient thing is a thing that knows the time frame is not its primary concern. It could wait. It could come back. It came to me 7 times over 12 years, and it came to Stefan 4 times over 4 years, and it presumably came to other boys in my mother's circle. And in Vera's circle over the years, those circles overlapped, and some of those boys refused and some of them did not. And the ones who did not gave it what it was looking for. What it was looking for, I do not know. I know what it was not looking for, which is the refusal, which is the thing I gave it 7 times through a combination of instinct and stubbornness, and the luck of having a nature that does not accept things easily. Chapter 14. Adi's mother, the thing I have not yet told you, and that is the reason I am writing this now rather than having written it years ago, happened 6 months ago. Adi's mother called from Nairobi on a Tuesday morning. Adi's was at work. I took the call and exchanged the ordinary pleasantries, and then her mother said, "I need to talk to Adi's about something, but I will tell you first so she has support when she hears it." I said, "Of course," and listened. Her mother told me that her younger sister, Adi's aunt, had recently told the family something that she had been holding for 40 years. The aunt had been told this thing by her own mother, which was Adi's grandmother, in the last weeks of the grandmother's life, as a thing that needed to be passed down rather than buried. When Adi's grandmother was a young woman in the village where she had been born in Kenya, a woman had come to the village. Not a woman anyone recognized. She had been there for some time, moving among the village's households, and she had come to the home of Adi's grandmother's family, and she had offered the young women of the family something. Adi's mother paused. She said, "An orange." The world became very still around me. She said my mother's sister took it. My mother refused. My mother's sister was not the same after that. She was well physically. She had a long life, but she was not the same. She had a quality that my mother could not name in Swahili or in English, a quality of having given something away that she could not get back. She did not dream. she told their mother years later. She had not dreamed in 40 years. Every night since the day she accepted the orange, she had lain down and slept and woken, and there was nothing in between, no dreaming, no sense of anything in the night. She said it was not unpleasant. She said it was like a room that had been emptied. I sat with the phone in my hand and thought about Stefan, who dreamed every night of the expression on Rose's face, satisfaction. And I thought about Adi's great aunt, who did not dream at all, emptied. Two different outcomes, two different things taken, but both of them taken. I thought, she is not one. She has never been one. Part 5, now chapter 15. Our son Adiz and I have a son. He is 7 years old. His name is not something I am going to include in this account, because this account is going to be read by people I do not know, and the things I am most afraid of I will not give names to in a place where names can be found. He is 7, which is 3 years younger than I was the first time Rose came to me. I think about this every day. We have talked to him in the way that you can talk to a 7-year-old about something like this, which is not the full version but not nothing. We have told him that if a person he does not know tries to give him food, he should say no and find us immediately, which is advice that the ordinary world also endorses for entirely mundane safety reasons, and that therefore does not require him to understand the specific reason behind it. We have told him that if he ever sees a woman he does not recognize standing very still and holding something out toward him, he should walk away and come to us and tell us everything. We have told him that some things that look like people are not people, and that the difference is something he will feel before he sees it, a quality of wrongness that his body will register before his mind does, and that when he feels that feeling he should trust it completely. He listened to all of this with the serious and full attention of a child receiving information he understands is important. He asked questions that were good questions, the questions of someone who is genuinely trying to understand rather than looking for the point at which they can stop paying attention. He asked, "What does she want?" I thought about this for a moment. I said something that you would be giving up without knowing you were giving it. He thought about this. He said, "So I should not take anything from her." "That is right," I said. He said, "What if she does not have an orange? What if she has something else?" I looked at my son for a moment, at the particular quality of his attention, which was total and precise in the way I hoped would serve him well in the years ahead. I said, "It will always be an orange, even if it does not look like one." He thought about this. Then he nodded and went back to what he had been doing, which was building something from the small colored blocks he preferred to any other toy, assembling it with care and patience, and a plan that existed only in his head. I sat and watched him build, and I thought about patience, about the particular patience of something that had been offering the same thing to boys and young men for at least a century, possibly much longer, in Europe and in Africa, and presumably in other places, where other people had not yet told their stories to anyone who was listening. About the patience of something that was in no hurry because the time frame was not its concern. Chapter 16. Last week. I am writing this because of last week. I am 33 and I have not seen Rose in 11 years, since the pavement outside the restaurant at 22, when I said no in a way that was different from the previous refusals, and she disappeared without leaving the orange behind. I had arrived in those 11 years at a version of accommodation with the existence of this in my life that was the most settled I had ever achieved. Not resolution, not the closing of the question, but the setting down of the active weight of it, the ability to live a full and present life without the constant low-level vigilance that the first 22 years had required. I had come to believe, without having confirmed this belief with evidence, that the declaration on the pavement had concluded something. That whatever she had been seeking from me, she had determined was not available and had moved on in whatever way something like her moves on. I was wrong. I was in the market last Tuesday evening, the ordinary evening market 3 blocks from our flat, buying the things on the list Adiz had sent me. I was in the produce section. I was alone because she was at work and my son was at a friend's house for dinner. I turned from the vegetable section to the fruit and she was there. She was standing at the end of the citrus display. She was holding an orange. She was exactly as she had been when I was 10. Exactly, precisely, completely. Not aged, not changed. The same brown hair, the same ordinary face, the same absolute stillness, the same expression that was not quite a smile. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at something beside me. I followed her gaze. My son was standing beside me. He had been dropped off early by his friend's father, who had tried to call me, but I had not heard the phone, and he had found me at the market, which was not unusual. We had done this before. He was standing beside me with the specific patience of a 7-year-old who has spotted his parent in a public place and has arrived at the parent's side and is waiting for the parent to notice him. He was looking at Rose. He was looking at her with an expression that I recognized immediately because I had worn it myself at 10 years old. The expression of someone whose body has registered something before their mind has, the expression of incipient understanding. I put my hand on his shoulder. I turned him gently so that he was facing me rather than her. I said, "We are leaving now." He looked at my face, and whatever he saw there was sufficient. He did not argue. He did not look back. We left. I have not looked at the footage from the market's security cameras. I do not know whether she was visible to anyone else in the store. I do not know whether she was there in any way that the ordinary physical world would confirm. I know that I saw her, and that my son saw her, and that those are the 2 things that matter. We are not going back to that market. I am writing this because I have carried it alone, except for Adiz, for 23 years, and I am done carrying it alone. I am writing this because if you have experienced something like this, if a person you do not know has come to you alone with an orange or anything else in both hands in that particular way, with that particular stillness and that particular voice, you should know that you are not imagining it, and you are not the only one. And I am writing this because my son saw her. He is 7 and he saw her and she looked at him. And the accommodation I had made is over and the vigilance is back in full, and I do not know what comes next. But I know what the answer is. Whatever she offers, however many times she comes, whatever she looks like when she comes, whatever the orange looks like, the answer is no. Chapter 17, the last entry. I am adding this 3 days after writing the account above. She came to the flat. I do not know how she came in. The flat is on the 4th floor and the building has a door code, and there was no sound of the front door opening or the lift or footsteps in the hallway. Adiz was putting our son to bed. I was in the kitchen. I turned from the sink and she was in the kitchen. She was not holding an orange. This was the first time in 23 years that she had appeared without the orange, and the absence of it changed the specific quality of wrongness she carried, changed it into something that I do not have precise language for except to say that it was more concentrated than before, the way a sound is more concentrated in a closed room than in the open air. She looked at me. Her face held the expression I had been looking at since I was 10, the expression that was not quite a smile, but there was something else in it tonight. Something I had not seen before. Something that I would, if I were going to use one word for it, call understanding. Not of me, of something. She said in the voice that was not her voice, "He is ready." I did not ask who she meant. I said no. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she held out her hands. both of them open, palms upward, the way you hold your hands when you are offering something. Her hands were empty. There was nothing in them. She held them out toward me with the empty palms upward, and she looked at me, and the expression on her face in that moment was the most complete version of itself I had ever seen. The expression finally fully realized, and I understood what it was. It was not a smile. It was a question. She was asking me whether, now that the orange was gone, now that there was nothing in her hands, I would take what she was offering anyway. Whether I had learned in 23 years of refusing to refuse the thing itself rather than just its form. I looked at her empty hands for a long moment. Then I said no. And she was gone. I stood in the kitchen for a while. Then I went to the hallway and I stood at the door of my son's room and I listened to Adi's voice reading to him, the particular calm and steady voice she used for bedtime, and the sound of his responses, which were the sounds of a child who is nearly asleep but is holding on for one more page. I stood in the hallway and I listened, and I let the sound fill the space that the appearance had left, which was the same space it had been leaving since I was 10 years old and which I was done trying to understand completely. Some things do not close. Some questions remain open for as long as you live with them, and the living with them is not the same as the answering of them. I am done trying to answer it. I'm not done saying no.